Hey.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I haven't seen you in, dang, it's been a while
Yeah, I
since we were
know.
both in DC.
Especially this year it's not even finished.
I know. We're like just half over and it feels like it's been 10 years.
Yeah, it really does. It really does.
Awesome. So, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited. I love talking women empowerment and the Second Amendment.
Absolutely, me too.
Uh, Great. So, why don't you just tell us like a little bit about yourself? I know that you are director of outreach for GOA. If you,
Yeah. Yeah, so that's my latest, as if the GOA is gonna be like, wait, what's your next one? Um my latest venture. So I'm the director of outreach for Gun Owners of America. I started that role last November. So really excited about that. I started an organization called Empower 2A, which started, man, April 2017. So a little over 3 years now. So crazy. It's now officially joined with Gun Owners of America, and it's the official women's outreach program for them now. So I head that up. I also do the student outreach because of when I started the whole Second Amendment in the Second Amendment community. I was a big Second Amendment activist through the college campus realm because I was a student, and pushed for campus carry in Texas. And then that's how I started Empowered, as a way to push campus carry nationally, but to do it through the lens that I got into the movement through, and that was through empowering myself as a woman and empowering other women on campus as well. So that's a little synopsis. That's a little summary, short summary of a little bit of my background. And yeah, so I do a little bit of outreach, all encompassing outreach right now.
awesome. So, you mentioned that when you started Empowered 2A, you wanted to reach young women, provide them tools to use firearms safely, especially on college campuses. So what inspired you to target that specific demographic of young women?
Yeah, well, I felt part of it is because I felt like there wasn't anybody in the 2A community that I felt was reaching out to us specifically. I felt like even the women's groups were more about moms, that whole mama bear, type of thing. Like that one is, I feel like even the women's movement of the Second Amendment movement, which is growing and it's, rapid, but it's mostly, I would say that the safe part is where it's talking about women protecting their children. Not much so about, young professionals, students, young women in general. And that's what I saw in my experience, is that in college, that's where you get a lot of your, when people push, feminist beliefs, and you're on your own, and you're, a lot of things that I think a lot of women start thinking about is in college, and as like right after college as well, when they're starting their own job. So I didn't feel like we were reached. I felt like even talking about feminism, saying the word feminist is, well, it still is. I still get flack for that in the conservative 2A world,
Mm-hmm.
but it's true. So I mean, even historically, it's true, and the roots are true, that feminism and the Second Amendment and empowering yourself through the Second Amendment as a woman is especially important, and has been especially impactful in equalizing us, and being able to bring equality in every single facet and form of feminism.
Yeah, that's such a good point. When we talk about feminism and supporting Second Amendment rights, and so many people say like, oh, well, guns are the great equalizer. But I think that's also a really important point, especially when you think about like how high, sexual violence rates are on college campuses
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
stuff like that, even though these campuses are, supposed to be, gun-free zones or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Gun free zones works totally, like, all the
yeah,
time.
they always work.
Yes.
So, I hear you say a lot, and this is something I agree with, that gun rights are women's rights. Can you tell us like what you mean by that?
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna be saying this is another thing I get flack for. I was just like, and this is another thing, and it's like, well, I think that's my life. Is
That's
that
true.
I always speak up on different things. Because there are people who definitely don't like the whole gun rights or women's rights. Like they'll always the retort. It's kind of like how when, like people say Black Lives Matter, and then the first thing they say is like all lives matter. It's like gun rights or women's rights. It's like no, gun rights are human rights. Like yes, yes, yes. I
It's
know
like, yeah,
they're
I
human.
know, but
Yeah, I know they're human rights, obviously. And women are part of that human race. But the big thing is that because it is an equalizer, it's an equalizer because there's obviously an inequality, whether that's minorities, whether that's, I mean, LGBTQ groups or, any group that is targeted because they are quote unquote different than the norm is what firearms are there to help equalize. It's to help us in that situation. So of course women, even on the other side, on physically we have less pound per pound, less lean muscle mass than the average male. I know there are exceptions, I know that, but so that makes having a firearm and the Second Amendment and protecting that God-given right even more important for women. And so that's why really it's looking at it the other way of like the women's rights movement and even what you think of modern feminism and the modern women's rights focus and movement is, okay, so we're talking about empowering women in every facet of life. Then we also need to talk about the physical aspect of things and making sure women feel like they are able to, go against another man who is on average going to be a lot bigger than them and stronger than them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. A lot of times when I say things like gun rights or women's rights, I get a lot of like, well, you shouldn't need to defend yourself. And it's like, I agree. Like, I wish we lived in
right.
I wish we
I
lived
don't
in a
want
world
to.
where like I didn't have to worry about being attacked and you didn't have to worry about being attacked. But unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, I guess you could say. So it's
Right.
it is so important that as much as we should, deal with issues on like a bigger stance, when it comes right down to it, it's sometimes you need a firearm to sort of level the playing field a bit.
Right. We're not in I think there's a lot of people who would like to believe in that, and that's also the danger of campuses. It's like that life is kind of that sheltered type of life because they sell that to you, right? At the end of the day, colleges are businesses, and so they're selling stuff to their parents, to the students' parents, to the students that this is a safe place, right?
Yeah.
This is a safe place. This is like in many ways, like it's almost like, and essentially what they're doing is breeding this and nurturing this nanny state of I can trust the government, I can trust the administration and entity above me to provide my safety, to provide everything that comes with the state. And so that's why, and for me, so for those who don't know, also I was as I said, I was a feminist. Like I was the modern feminist when I first went to college. So I was anti-gun because that's what they tell you, feminists, you have to be anti-gun if you're a feminist. You can't be anything else. And like all of that. And so it was really, I discovered liberty through the facet of understanding the Second Amendment and understanding like, okay, for one thing, all I saw growing up was the bad people with guns, right? I never saw on local news even the person who defended themselves with a firearm, even though that happened all the time.
Right.
The news is never going to push that out. So media, movies, everything, entertainment never showed that. They never showed someone like me, a woman that I trust myself. I'm law abiding, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm obviously doing well. I'm in college, right? And so then why can't I have the ability to defend myself? And so that type of thinking brought me more into the liberty movement, just because I understood that little part of it. So.
Yeah, I think the idea of colleges sort of really encouraging this like nanny type thinking, it's really interesting. Even looking back on my own instances, I attended Temple University, And I remember on the tours them saying like, we have such a big police force, like we're
Right.
so safe. And it's like, well, that's great, but you know, when I became a survivor of sexual violence, that doesn't really help, you know.
Right. And
so
they don't talk about those numbers.
Oh no.
Like,
I had no idea that issue was as pervasive as it was until it happened to me.
Right.
And then you do research in it and you're like, what, like, why are we not encouraging women to do anything they can to defend themselves? Right. But I think a lot of it's like a culture war of trying to win public opinion. So, you know, when stories like mine and when you speak, if it doesn't go with the, you know, the narrative they're trying to sell, that can get silenced, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk COVID-19 really fast.
Okay.
So gun sales have been skyrocketing. I'm sure that that's something that, you know, you've seen a lot of in your line of work, both with GOA and your activism. So, you know, gun sales have skyrocketed as people fear societal unrest. So do you think that this sort of surge to buy firearms as a means of protection, do you think this indicates like a shift in public opinion, or do you think it's temporary? I know there's really no way to know, but just if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, there's several that I definitely have a lot of thoughts on that. And even just seeing state-wise, like when a lot of the mandates and stuff like that started like safe in place, whatever, where we had to quarantine and stay inside. In March, like in Colorado, the spike we saw on the state level was just insane. And not saying that obviously just Democrats can be pro-gun, et cetera, but this is a Democrat-heavy state, you know, like it's not Texas, it's not like the typical place that you would think, oh, okay, well, yeah, of course it went up. So going up here, particularly in places like Denver, like Boulder, that are home rule states and have actually banned like open carry and stuff like that, which is against the state. I just remember my brother, who's, you know, progressive, everything, and like him texting me like, I think I'm gonna invest in a gun. Like right after all this stuff happened, I was like, okay, like it's so great that you're joining the party now. Well, let me tell you all the, you know, impediments that you're gonna have because the people that you voted for, especially in Denver. So he was like, oh man, all this work. I'm like, yeah. So there are a lot of people who are like, oh my goodness, I need to get a gun. And so there was this rush. And unfortunately, there were, you know, because of NICS, because of the background check system, there was a backlog. It was, instead of an instant background check, it was 2 to 3 days on average in Colorado. There was a backlog of 5,000 people on the waiting list, still waiting to even be, you know, checked. People waiting for their gun, like they couldn't because they had to go back and then come back, which is here, you don't have a waiting period. But think about the states that actually have waiting periods, like California, for example, where it's 10 days, even if it's working smoothly. So there are a lot of people who definitely are new to gun ownership and getting a gun. But another thing about COVID, about this time, is that because of COVID, they were also not allowing training. And so here we are, we have this big wave of people who are new gun owners, awesome, but they're not able to train. Not good, right? Because they're saying it's not an essential, like concealed carry permits, they also were saying that's not essential. So they weren't even be able to carry outside of their home. They weren't able to have classes because of training. And then the people who had classes, you know, it was like this vicious cycle. So that was a part of the problem. I don't think we'll really know the impact until COVID ends, where we see more people who are going to classes and even in the ballot box, like how that would impact them later, so they don't have to deal with what they dealt with, you know, during COVID. So hopefully the cognitive dissonance does not prevail.
Yeah, I found it interesting for myself, just the people reaching out to me that I just know from, you know, high school or college or just have met, you know, throughout the years, saying like, hey, you know, I changed my mind, I want to get a gun, can you help me? And it's
Right.
like, yeah, I'm happy to help and be like a source of information, but you should know that
Yeah, right.
you can't just like go and swipe your card and then they just hand you like an AR. Like that's not, unfortunately, how this works.
Right.
So it's been really interesting watching the sort of light bulb moments where people realize like, oh, like these things I voted for sounded really good, but now that I need a gun, I have to wait because the state said you have to wait, but that same state is shut down. Like it's really interesting. And also, I don't know if I want to say unfortunate because it's makes me happy that they're like waking up, but at the same time, it's like you did this to yourself.
Right. And that's what it usually happens. I mean, this is essentially not the only reason why, obviously, but this type of situation is exactly why we have this protected freedom, is because of situations like that where the government is being tyrannical and saying, yeah, sure, you have all these rights, we're just gonna postpone those rights for right now, and you have to stay at home, and we're gonna mandate this. And there were like a lot of people were, I remember at one time people were like, am I gonna have to hunt for my own food? Because they weren't even allowing people to buy gardening stuff. Like I remember that in like certain states, it wasn't essential to go and buy like seeds and garden stuff. It's like there's something more than just staying in place because it's safer. So that's why people started like realizing at the end of the day, I need to be self-sufficient. I need to be able to protect myself. I also need to have a gun if I need to like actually get food for my family, if it ever comes to that, like things like that. So I think people definitely, like you were saying, woke up to a lot of those types of scenarios now.
Yeah, even when you can go to the store, right? There's so many people panicking and you have to worry. You know, like I know that you're married, but I'm sure sometimes you have to go to the store by yourself and just being a woman and a mother to be, you have to worry about your safety, and people get crazy when they're desperate.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So one thing that I find really interesting about the work you've done is that you really encourage women to take safety seriously. So how can we as like supporters of liberty and us as feminists, I know it's like a dirty word, but us as feminists,
the F word.
The F word. How do we encourage women to take safety seriously?
Yeah, that's what I'm so passionate about, because I mean, both of us as survivors, we know, like, it's not just something, even if it happens to you or you use therapy or whatever, for the most part, more than likely you're impacted for the rest of your life. And that's one incident you can't, I mean, obviously you wish that you would never have gotten to that point in the first place. So because we understand that so well, I understand that so well as well, I want to do everything I can to prevent things like that from happening. And that was part of what I was seeing a lot of, like, not like the feminist movement or people who were on the left weren't talking about sexual assault or whatever, but they were always talking about it after the fact. They were always talking about what can administration do when it comes to like rape culture, or, the perpetrator, focusing on the guy, but not focusing on what we as women can do. And so so that was really important to me. Is like, I want to make sure in my, I won't say legacy, but in my work, that not only are we empowering women, for those who do want to be, have a firearm, but also empowering them through the mentality, because I know I went through this process of essentially gaining my empowerment back, gaining my power back, that I felt essentially I would never get back in any form or fashion. And particularly the safety aspect of protecting my body, that's, as a survivor, that's so important to me. And that impacted so many other parts of my life as well, mentally, because I think a lot of women are groomed and raised to believe, one, that they don't have permission to fight back. Like, there's so many women who are like, oh yeah, I believe in the Second Amendment. All right, okay, go, here's a dummy, like, go and like, do what you need to do because they're about to hurt you. And there's so much, I just remember seeing so many women who are just like, they couldn't do that, right? It's just not a natural response. And it's also not, I would say more, it's not conditioned response, because we're not conditioned to think, if I get in that situation, this is what I need to do. And it's going to be a different type of person. Like, you're going to be a different Savannah. You're going to be a different Antonia at that moment, because it's life or death. It's like literally life or death. And so women are not, but you have to be at the point where people just think you just take a training class and then, oh yeah, as long as you remember it, then you're good. In that moment, you must be at the point where it's muscle memory or it's not happening. And that takes a lot of training, and that takes a mindset, a mentality shift. And so it's just really changing the culture of women of, you can protect yourself. You have, you're empowered because of what you are given as a human being, and you have permission to do that. And I think we need more women to think that way. Otherwise, they're going to go towards a nanny state and other issues, including safety. And that's just a detriment in general for everybody.
Yeah, I think storytelling is a really important part of that too, right? That's why, as hard as it is for me to talk about, being a rape survivor, and for you to talk about surviving, sexual violence, it's really hard to be open and talk about, one of the worst things that could ever be done to another human being.
Right.
But we do it so that people realize that, it can happen to you. And I definitely, I'm totally guilty of being the person that was like, oh yeah, it happens, but like not to me. Or like, oh, that happens like on Law and Order SVU, and Olivia Benson just like swings in and she saves them and you're good. But, unfortunately there are situations like with what happened to me where you're on your own.
Right.
And so I think storytelling is really important there, and putting, I guess, just a face to not the narrative, but a face to the points that we're making.
Right. Yeah. And I also think that's why we don't see any of these, like, over 1 million people. The numbers always, range from 1 million to 3 million a year use firearm for self-defense. And most of them are not even pulling the trigger. But those type of things, the fact that, like, if you're really looking at it, and I look at it a lot more now, it's always local news at max, but of women who are defending themselves in real life situations, like, this happens all the time. And so people don't know about it, they're not aware, and so they think it's just, sure, maybe it happens if it does, but it's not here, like, not in my neighborhood, or not in my school, until it happens to you. And then unfortunately, that's when they find out their neighborhood doesn't want people to know about it, their school doesn't want people to know about it, and so you're on your own. And particularly for women. And that's why when I started Empowered, I saw this gap of, like, on the left, it was no guns, right? But female empowerment, talking about that. And then on the right, it was feminism is a bad word. It's the other F word. And also, like, you shouldn't be talking about that stuff. Like, rape culture isn't real, or rather the numbers are skewed, like, all that stuff. But, like, again, as survivors, I didn't care. Not like I don't care about the numbers. By the end of the day, if I can save one person, one woman from going through what I have to go through 20 years later, 20, 30 years, almost 30 years later, then that's worth it to me, that one woman. And so we have to think more, we have to think like that in order for us to actually impact people. And that's why outreach is so different than just rallying the base and getting people excited about the Second Amendment. It impacts people's individual lives. It really does. And that's how we're going to get more people on our side, if we can help them see that earlier before it's too late.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times the idea of, like, supporting gun rights is seen as a very, like, right-wing thing.
Right.
But when you think about it, like, even the most, liberal person still has Second Amendment rights in America. And their ability to defend themselves is equally important because of, their value as a human being. So
and they get to choose not to exercise that right.
Yeah. Like, if you don't want a gun, please don't get one.
Right, exactly. It's just, you need to have that ability to even, I mean, you have, the thing is, and maybe here, I mean, this is where maybe the ladies' liberty part comes in, the libertarian side of, if the government tells you no, you still have a human right to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is just something, just essentially just writing down the rights that we already have, the natural rights that we already have as human beings. So regardless if an entity tells you, no, you can't have your Second Amendment right, you know, you can't exercise it, regardless of where they come from, it doesn't matter. So at the end of the day, it comes down to you. Do you want to exercise that right or do you not? And there are a lot of women who are, a lot of men too, who are afraid of firearms, and so they won't take that step. But you need to protect that right. So if you want to be a law-abiding citizen, but also so you just don't have to think about that all the time of, oh, if I want to actually have my rights, if I want to exercise my rights, I don't want to have to think about, you know, going to prison all the time.
Yeah.
You know, even though it is a human right, you do have that right, that natural right to it, regardless of the law.
Yeah, and even the awful things that can come out about it, you know, like the Philando Castile case and all of that. There's a lot of, I think in the media, the way that like gun ownership is portrayed is that it's very like flimsy and like, oh, I just like have this case of firearms, which is, and I just leave them there and I don't worry about it.
Right.
But I think what's so important that we explain is that, you know, owning a gun is a huge responsibility and it's not something that should be taken lightly. But even with that, it's still your given right, you know.
Absolutely.
One might say like your God-given right.
Right.
So talking about outreach, reaching people who have never really considered owning a gun or never thought that they needed one. Now, for whatever reason, with COVID or becoming more aware of sexual violence statistics against women, stuff like that, you know, if someone's watching right now or watches this later and they're not a gun owner, but they're interested in owning one for self-defense, what advice would you give them? Like, what's like the things that they should really know as they're considering whether or not to use a firearm as their means of self-defense?
Ooh, well, I think there's several things, but I try to go back to what I thought, you know, a few years ago when I was starting this journey for myself. And when it's self-defense, more than likely you are dealing with, more than likely you're not having to have, I mean, obviously it does happen, but it's not home defense. It's not something that's what's the main focus. It's you going out into the world and protecting yourself against someone else who wants to harm you. That's usually what that is in that situation. So that means that you're going to not only have a gun, you're going to go to the next step of concealed carrying or open carrying if your state allows it. And going that next step of just having the firearm on your person. And so I know for me, when I first started, like I remember not, you know, I took the small baby steps of just getting used to having a firearm on my body, like on my person. And I do suggest that even if you're a woman, that you do try to go that route instead of like purse carry or whatever. You can do that if that's what you want to do. But I would suggest, you know, having it on your person. And so I had a gun on me like for a week, I remember, just to like not feel like I always was paranoid that someone's going to see me or I was printing or, you know, someone's going to find out that I have a gun on me, you know, like stuff like that you just don't know about. You don't feel, especially if you didn't grow up with firearms, because you've never experienced going like concealed carrying. So I would suggest women, first of all, go to the range, when you're looking for a gun, you go and buy that firearm. You go and try out that firearm. Don't let someone else get it for you. Suggestions are great. Even for me, when I suggest it to other people, that's great, but everybody's different. Yeah. And then after the fact, when you buy it, it's going to be a lifestyle. It is. And so you need to figure out how the best route for you in order to be able to utilize that lifestyle, because really you should be wearing it every single day. I mean, that's the whole point. And you don't know when you're going to need it. And so it should be comfortable for you as an individual, where you feel comfortable wearing it every single day. So that it's a lot. Obviously I could go into whole classes and stuff on that, But I would just say that, like, that's probably the thing I get the most is a lot of guys who are well-meaning and they're just like, I'm going to get something for my wife or my girlfriend, or if I even in the gun range, I worked at gun ranges for a long time just to learn the whole process. And there's still a lot of people like, I'm going to buy it for my girlfriend. Well, that's great. But we have a ladies' night, so why don't you actually bring her on that night and you guys together like figure out what is best for her.
Yeah.
Don't try and do what you think is best for her. So there's a feminist part coming out of me too.
That's okay. I think you know, all ladies that are pro liberty tend to have actual feminist, you know,
yeah.
inside. Yeah, that's you've made a lot of great points, you know, it being a lifestyle and making sure that your firearm's not an afterthought. So I can speak for my own experience that even though I'm fairly knowledgeable about firearms and I'd like to think I'm a pretty good shot, going to a gun range, if they don't know me there, getting a lot of like, oh, well, you could just get like a revolver and like,
right.
Here's your little, like, we have them in pink and we have them in Tiffany blue. And it's like this is my life on the line. Like, this is a life or death thing. You know, I carry a gun because I know what evil looks like and I know what it's capable of. So do you have any advice, I guess, on not for women, like, to not get discouraged and like places that they can reach out if they have questions where they're not going to get spoken to like they're like 10?
Yeah. And you know what? And that's part of why I was getting in trouble too. I wanted to see that it for myself, if there's sexism in this community, just like any human being, any other community, there is, you know, just like anything else. But this is something like right now the stats show, and I'm sure, I mean, I hope when they will update it soon, but the most recent stat is that 22% of gun owners are women, and that's growing and that keeps growing. But now what we're hoping, I see a lot of other women is like wanting to see women in leadership, but also wanting to see women in roles like at gun ranges and stuff like that. So when they go to gun ranges, other women feel comfortable. I've had women come up to me and other Black women as well on top of that saying, it is so nice to like see just someone, you know, like that looks like me here, because I think that just in any situation or any scenario, that's helpful to see someone that looks like you or has an experience that's probably close to yours. And so I think that representation helps calm fears. But then even as someone who had worked at the gun range, I would get it from people who, you know, as customers who are just like, is there a guy that I can, you know, talk to about like this gun or something? It's like, no. Or like, you know, I have a clip that I need to like talk about. Like, well, I don't have any clips in my hair today, but I could help you if you're okay with that. Like stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just like you kind of have to like push back, and gun guys are usually good with that. They like someone who can, you know, speak up for themselves. They can handle it. But for the most part, it is something we have to acknowledge exists. Otherwise, we will continue to push women, or women who are new in general will come timid, and then they'll have that one experience. And I've had girls I've had to console because they're crying because they've had boyfriends and, you know, husbands, maybe well-meaning, but let's just the first time ever, like they haven't been in a gun range, and let's like just give a blackout or something like that, like, you know, stuff like that. Let's like most powerful gun in the world, and this person, your girlfriend, is crying because she never wants to experience guns anymore. That's going to impact her for the rest of her life, and
Absolutely.
she's going to make decisions, political decisions too, based on that bad experience. So we have to be cognizant of the first impression. That's gun ranges, that's the customer, the employees as well. But the culture of, it's not just a guy thing or whatever. It's it's a human right, and we need to be very open to be inclusive in that. So we make sure everybody feels comfortable in those environments, because they should.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. You know, I think a lot of mainstream media wants people to think that like guns are just for old white men, but like we're clearly not two old white men. So
Right,
you know, that's
right. Yeah,
demographics
exactly.
are changing, and it's I think, exciting to see young women really taking safety seriously. You know, I wish it's something we didn't have to do, but, you know, as we both know, there are terrible people in the world.
Right.
So before we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
This was a really great conversation. I think it's so important that, you know, we have these discussions about how to get women to take safety seriously and sort of how to communicate that. So thank you very much.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And if anybody has any questions or they, have any questions in general with anything, just please DM me. I answer my DMs pretty, frequently and regularly. So I would love to answer any questions if you're thinking about it, or have a friend that you are trying to entice and need some pointers on how to entice
Yes, just slide in
them.
our DMs.
Yes, slide
And we'll...
literally sliding their DMs.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck with little baby Cover. And
Thank you.
yay.
Thank you. I'm
So
one of the mama
exciting.
bears now, so that's like 5 years
That's
later.
true, you are.
Right?
So you can you're reaching all new demographics already.
I know. I know, all of them just check. So, and I already feel it. The baby's not even here, and I'm like, and it's a boy, and so it's like, yeah, obviously I'm just like, oh yeah, I know how it is now, and he's not even here yet. So.
Oh yeah. I feel like I haven't even met my son face to face, but I will throw down to protect him.
I will destroy you.
Nice.
So, but yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.